Hello and welcome to Firstpost Live, where we bring you the day's top 4 stories from across the world. I am Joshua Barnes, live from the Firstpost studios. Let's begin with the headlines. South Korea's unification minister says there is a considerable chance that US President Donald Trump could meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un during his visit to the peninsula next week for the APEC forum. Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, says she will take relations with the United States to new heights in upcoming talks with President Donald Trump, while promising a tougher stance on China and foreign policy. Hundreds of women in Australia's Defence Forces file a class action lawsuit against the government, alleging 2 decades of sexual violence, harassment and discrimination within the military ranks. Thailand will likely hold its next general election on March the 29th, after Prime Minister Anutin reportedly discussed the plan with the Election Commission. The formal announcement of the election date is still pending. And Alaska Airlines resumes operations after a major IT outage grounded all its flights for several hours, the second such disruption in 3 months. Let's begin with India. A tragic accident was reported from Andhra Pradesh's Kurnool district. A private bus travelling from Hyderabad caught fire after colliding with a motorcycle. At least 20 people have lost their lives, with officials warning that the toll could still rise. Investigations were underway to ascertain the full sequence of events and identify all victims. What remains of the bus is a charred metal frame, reduced entirely to blackened debris and smoke. The fire was so intense that nothing but the skeletal structure of the vehicle now stands at the site. The incident occurred at around 3 a.m. local time in Kurnool district. A Bengaluru-bound private bus collided with a two-wheeler and the motorcycle got trapped underneath the vehicle. The motorcyclist also died in the accident. Officials said the impact damaged the motorcycle's fuel tank, triggering a sudden blaze that engulfed the bus within minutes. Many passengers were asleep at the time, leaving them with little chance to escape.
Around 2:40 के आसपास बस रुकी, मतलब मैं उठा, फिर मतलब बस एक्सीडेंट हुआ ऐसा कुछ लगा मेरे को, तो मैं उठा, बाहर देखा तो आग लगी हुई थी आगे फ्रंट में और थोड़ा लेफ्ट साइड में, मतलब लेफ्ट साइड में ऊपर सीट थी मेरी, उधर से दिख रहा था। पहले तो मेरे को मतलब विश्वास नहीं हुआ कि आगे या फिर क्या है, मतलब लाइट चमक रही है। फिर थोड़ी देर में रियलाइज़ हुआ कि फायर है, तो कुछ लोगों का आवाज़ आया, सब लोग सो रहे थे, 2-3 लोग उठे थे बस पे, सब लोगों को जगाया, फिर फायर करके बोला, मतलब गेट डाउन फायर। तो हम लोग आगे से निकलने की कोशिश कर रहे थे, ड्राइवर लोगों को पता नहीं था कहाँ पे है, डोर लॉक थे, थोड़े मेन डोर लॉक था, तो वो बीच वाला जो डोर रहता वो ओपन करने की कोशिश किया, वो भी क्लोज था। तो पीछे गए हम लोग, पीछे इमरजेंसी विंडो था, डोर नहीं था, हैंडल कुछ भी नहीं था, हैंडल नहीं था, तो ऐसी नॉर्मल विंडो था, उसको ब्रेक करा हम लोगों ने।
Officials have said that the bus door did not open because of internal wiring damage during the collision, which made evacuation difficult. The bus was engulfed in flames within minutes. Out of the 41 passengers on board, at least 21 managed to escape with the help of others. Forensic teams were deployed to collect DNA samples to identify the charred bodies. Police and emergency teams emptied the diesel tank and sealed off the area. Medical teams treated the injured, who were reported to be stable. Officials say the bus had no proper fire control system or emergency equipment. Authorities have called for stricter safety checks for private bus operators to prevent such accidents in the future.
कर्नाटका ट्रांसपोर्ट मिनिस्ट्री डिपार्टमेंट और आंध्रा तीनों मिलके आने वाला दिन में ऐसा संगठन फिर न हो, ऐसा कानून बनाएंगे। और हम ट्रांसपोर्ट लोगों को भी हम रिक्वेस्ट करते हैं और आदेश भी देता है, कोई भी बस बाहर फिटनेस रूल के खिलाफ घूमे तो उसको सीज करेंगे। पहले जनता की जान से नहीं खेलना है, आपका जिम्मेदारी, आपका जीवन आधार है। मगर इसका मतलब है कि इसका जीवन का लूटने का। तो जो भी प्रिकॉशन लेना है। ये बहुत बड़ी दुर्घटना की संगठन है, एक्सीडेंट है, कोई गाड़ी बस के नीचे घुस गए तो उसमें हो गए थे, उसमें कम से कम 20 लोग की मृत्यु हुआ। अभी जानकारी हो रहे 21 लोग पैसेंजर और 3 बस का स्टाफ बचे हुए हैं। उनका जो भी हॉस्पिटल ट्रीटमेंट जो भी है तेलंगाना सरकार की तरफ से भी मिनट परस्यू हो रहे हैं। मैं खुद आंध्रा मिनिस्टर और वहां की कलेक्टर और डीआईजी से बात की है।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has responded, saying he was deeply saddened by the incident and announcing an ex gratia for the families of those who died and 50,000 rupees for the injured. President Draupadi Murmu expressed deep sorrow over the tragedy, extending her heartfelt condolences to the bereaved families and praying for the speedy recovery of those injured. Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister also expressed shock. He directed officials to support affected families and oversee treatments of the injured. Road accidents in India claimed around 180,000 lives last year, with many cases linked to speeding, poor vehicle condition and a lack of emergency safeguards. The Kurnool tragedy has renewed calls for mandatory fire safety systems in long-distance buses. The exact number of casualties is expected to become clearer after identification procedures are completed. Authorities said safety inspections and stricter enforcement were likely to follow. We will continue to track updates on rescue, relief and investigation efforts. Moving on now to diplomatic tensions between the United States and Canada. President Donald Trump has announced an end to trade talks with Ottawa just weeks after what seemed like a friendly White House meeting between himself and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. In a post on his Truth Social account on Thursday, Trump said all trade negotiations with Canada were terminated. The reason? An anti-tariff ad campaign from Canada's Ontario province, which Trump called fake and interfering. Trump accused Canada of misquoting former President Ronald Reagan on trade policy. The Ronald Reagan Foundation later claimed that Ontario's ad had used selective audio and video from a 1987 Reagan radio address. It said the ad misinterpreted Reagan's remarks and that it was reviewing legal options. The ad featured Reagan warning that high tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation and trade wars. The fallout comes barely 2 weeks after Carney's visit to Washington, a meeting where Trump had described him as a world-class leader and promised a positive outcome on tariffs. Trump's sweeping tariffs covering steel, aluminium and autos has hit Canadian industries hard, triggering layoffs and driving up costs. Speaking a day before Trump's announcement, Carney said US trade policy had fundamentally changed, warning that tariffs were returning to levels last seen during the Great Depression. He described the shift as a rupture and urged Canadians to brace for sacrifices as Ottawa rethinks its economic strategy. Despite the breakdown in talks, both countries continue to operate under the USMCA, covering trade between the US, Canada and Mexico. Signed during Trump's first term, the deal ensures that around 85% of trade between these countries remains tariff-free. Carney has said preserving the USMCA remains his top priority ahead of its scheduled review in 2026. Trump and Carney are expected to cross paths again at the ASEAN summit in Malaysia and the APEC forum in South Korea over the coming days. But with Trump claiming the suspension of trade talks, ties between the two countries are headed for a new period of economic and political strain. Moving on now to rising tensions between Washington and Moscow after the United States imposed new sanctions on Russia's two biggest oil companies. Responding to the sanctions, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that he would not bow to pressure from the West. President Putin called the sanctions an unfriendly act and said that they would not significantly impact Russia's economy. He, however, admitted the same losses were expected.
Now regarding the new sanctions. First of all, there is nothing new here. Yes, they are of a serious nature for us, of course, this is understandable, and they will have certain consequences, but still they will not significantly affect our economic well-being.
President Putin described the move as an attempt to pressure Russia and stated that no self-respecting country acts under pressure. Putin also warned that the restrictions could raise global oil prices and said that President Trump should think about who his administration is really working for. The Russian leader also warned that if the United States supplied Ukraine with Tomahawk cruise missiles, which Kyiv has actively been seeking, Russia's response would be very strong.
This is an attempt to escalate, but if these weapons are used to strike on Russia, the response will be very serious. I should even say overwhelming. Let them think about it.
President Putin also said that Moscow would continue dialogue with the Trump administration, but reiterated that Russia would not yield to outside pressure.
The US president has decided to cancel or postpone this meeting. More likely, he is talking about postponing it. What can we say? Dialogue is always better than any confrontation, any disputes, or, especially, war. That is why we have always supported continued dialogue, and we continue to support it.
Well, Putin's comments come as plans for an in-person meeting between Trump and the Russian leader fell apart earlier this week after the US president proposed a ceasefire along current front lines, an idea that Russia rejected. Trump confirmed that the meeting had been cancelled, though the White House later said it is not completely off the table.
Meeting between these two leaders is not completely off the table. I think the president and the entire administration hopes that one day that can happen again, but we want to make sure that there's a tangible, positive outcome out of that meeting, and that it's a good use of the president's time.
Meanwhile, at the White House, President Trump downplayed the immediate impact of these sanctions, saying their effect would become clearer in the next 6 months. He remarked that he was glad Putin felt confident, but added, and I quote, "Let's see how it all works out." Now, the latest move marks the first sanctions on Moscow since President Donald Trump returned to office, and is aimed at cutting off vital oil revenues that fund Russia's war in Ukraine. Together, Rosneft and Lukoil account for nearly half of Russia's crude exports. Following the announcement, global oil prices rose by almost 5%. Earlier, Russia's foreign ministry said the country had developed a strong immunity to sanctions and warned that new measures could harm diplomatic efforts to end the Ukraine war. Ukraine has welcomed the US sanctions. President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked Trump for what he called a resolute and well-targeted decision.
Of 19th package of sanctions is crucial for us. Thank you so much. And today it goes together with the yesterday's decisions of President Trump on energy, also sanctions package. We waited for this. God bless, it will work. And this is very important.
He also praised the European Union's plans to explore new funding for Ukraine for 2 further years, possibly using frozen Russian assets. Meanwhile, reports of Russian drone incursions in several NATO nations and a rise in tensions between both sides prompted Russia to issue a nuclear warning. Russia's foreign ministry recently stated that tensions could increase further as some NATO members, in particular Poland, want to abandon restrictions on the deployment of nuclear weapons in their countries. As it stands, the new sanctions have deepened economic and diplomatic strains between the two countries. With oil prices rising, global reactions divided, and talks suspended, it remains unclear whether this latest move will bring Moscow closer to the negotiating table or push it further away. Finally, shifting focus to Egypt. Rival Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah, held rare talks amid efforts to solidify a fragile US-backed ceasefire within Gaza. Egyptian state media reported that delegations from Hamas and Fatah met in Cairo on Thursday to discuss the second phase of the truce plan. The talks reportedly focused on steps needed to implement the next stage of the ceasefire and on rebuilding a unified Palestinian front. The meeting reportedly covered arrangements for the period after the war in Gaza. Both sides agreed to continue discussions in the coming weeks. The two groups hold opposing views on how to achieve Palestinian statehood, their ties with Israel, and control over Palestinian territories. After Hamas won the 2006 legislative elections, violent clashes broke out between the two sides, culminating in Gaza's takeover by Hamas and expulsion of Fatah in 2007. Thursday's Cairo meeting marked a rare attempt to rebuild trust and unity nearly 2 decades after that split. Additionally, the Egyptian intelligence chief also held separate meetings with other Palestinian factions, including Islamic Jihad and 2 groups of Palestinian Liberation Organization. These meetings, officials said, are part of efforts to achieve national Palestinian consensus. The developments come against the backdrop of US President Donald Trump's 20-point peace plan, which envisions Arab and Muslim nations forming a multinational security force in Gaza as Israeli troops withdraw. Meanwhile, in Israel, visiting US Secretary of State Marco Rubio expressed optimism that the ceasefire would hold, even as political tensions flared over the West Bank. The US has reacted sharply to Israeli bills paving the way for annexation of the West Bank. In an interview, US President Donald Trump warned Israel against any move to annex the occupied West Bank.
It won't happen. It won't happen. It won't happen because I gave my word to the Arab countries. And you can't do that now. We have had great Arab support. It won't happen because I gave my word to the Arab countries. It will not happen. Israel would lose all of its support from the United States if that happened.
Vice President J.D. Vance also echoed that warning, calling the annexation push a very stupid political stunt.
The West Bank is not going to be annexed by Israel. The policy of the Trump administration is that the West Bank will not be annexed by Israel. That will continue to be our policy. And if people want to take symbolic votes, they can do that. But we certainly weren't happy about it.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio also said that Israel's West Bank plan would threaten the Gaza ceasefire. Arab states, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan and Turkey, jointly condemned the Israeli parliament's vote, saying it crosses a red line. These same countries are being courted by Washington to contribute troops and funds for Gaza's stabilisation, a central part of Trump's peace plan. As Hamas and Fatah weigh a post-war roadmap in Cairo, the US is walking a tightrope, pushing for restraint while trying to prevent a new flashpoint in the West Bank from unravelling the fragile calm in Gaza. That's all we have on the show today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Until then, thank you for watching.